Steve, there were a lot of people in this room that were interested or would have been interested in hearing about your plans for the Ring of Fire. I didn't hear any of that discussion. That's a big northern issue.
It is a huge northern issue, and it is a little bit disappointing that of all the things that we covered, we didn't get to really unpack the discussion around the Ring of Fire. In particular, for example, how I believe and we believe that Doug Ford set us backwards 4 years ago when he made, I think, a very cavalier and disrespectful comment about, I'm going to hop onto a bulldozer if I have to and make this happen, tearing up agreements that were in place. Here we are 4 years later, and even though, again, he reads a script that others have written for him, boasting about what he's accomplished, we know, everyone knows in this province, there's no real progress that the Ford Conservatives have made on the Ring of Fire. Ontario Liberals will work constructively with all of our partners, municipal partners and Indigenous partners, so that we can build the road that will unlock the incredible potential and keep jobs here in the north. And we won't make disrespectful, cavalier comments about hopping onto bulldozers like somehow bravado is going to actually deliver progress. That's the Doug Ford way. It's not the Ontario Liberal way.
On that, then. Kathleen Wynne, who was the premier, your premier, talked about going canoeing up there, and her government, your government, didn't really have a lot of interest in developing the Ring of Fire. Is that somehow changed now?
Well, first of all, we had a lot of interest in developing the Ring of Fire, and in particular, we included the funding, the full funding from a provincial perspective to build the road that would unlock the potential. My recollection is that we had 3 or 4 agreements in place with Indigenous peoples. Doug Ford, I believe, has 2, and I think he just got one in the last number of weeks, or just submitted one in the last number of weeks. Again, that's actually taking us backwards, and in part because of the arrogance of the comments that he made 4 years ago, that if he needed to, he was going to jump into a bulldozer, rather than actually showing up, rolling up his sleeves, and doing the hard work that's required. Arrogance, I might say, that we see echoed today because he didn't come out and face all of you after this northern debate, which I think is a real lost opportunity for him.
About the Ontario Northlanders,
sure.
Kathleen Wynne, that took it off the tracks, which caused a lot of.
It was actually the previous government. It was before I was elected as an MPP. Yeah, yeah.
Liberals took it off the tracks, caused a lot of chaos and a lot of upset people here in North Bay, in Northern Ontario. What's changed now?
Well, the new leader. So I wasn't an MPP. I know that the others on the stage were trying to rewrite history, Doug in particular. I wasn't an MPP when that decision was made. I was elected first after the Northlander decision was made. I am someone who is committed as a new leader with a new team, including Tanya Braybosch right here in Nipissing, who understands the value of once again reestablishing rail for the north. We will deliver it. We've made the commitment within 2 years.
You weren't an MP though.
Sorry, one at a time.
I mean, it's following up on the Northlander. Like, if it was a Liberal government before you, you were still the transportation minister after that, and it wasn't a priority. Like, don't they kind of have a point to me?
Well, again,
kind of why it wasn't a priority when you were the minister.
Well, look, the fact of the matter is I'm not running to be a senior cabinet minister right now. I'm running to be premier. And as premier, with the new leadership in our party and our new team, we will deliver within 2 years. I will just point out, despite, again, the bravado and the big words and the spin, Doug Ford has been premier for 4 years. There's no rail service that's being reestablished in the north. There's no road to the Ring of Fire that's even started construction. Every single highway project, I think, except perhaps one, every single one of them, from 69 to 1117 to others, is already under construction in part or almost completed. Which party started the construction, fought for those dollars? Liberals. So I know that Doug Ford and Ms. Horwath want to be a little bit selective about history. I'm not looking backwards. The new Ontario Liberal team is looking forwards about how we can build up Northern Ontario. Sorry, there's one question coming here.
You were transportation minister, though. Why did you not address it when you were transportation minister?
Well, again, I'm running to be premier now, not a senior cabinet minister. So the new Ontario Liberal team, we have a new plan. We are moving forward, and we've made the commitment. It's in our plan, and it's a costed commitment. Unlike the commitments that we've seen so far from the NDP, our plan is fully costed. We haven't seen their numbers now 15 days after they released their platform.
But was it not on your radar back then?
It was on our radar, and we were having ongoing conversations as a government, but I'm running to be premier this time around, and that is a fundamental difference versus where we were several years ago.
So do you see the train as being more financially feasible than your predecessors did, or are you just more willing to pay for the subsidy for the service?
Look, I'm more willing to say that it's important for the quality of life, for health care, for post-secondary access, to make sure that people living in Northern Ontario have access to rail service. And I think you will all know by now that I do believe in supporting and funding transit. That's one of the reasons that we've made a commitment to deliver Buck a Ride province-wide, including $1 fares on current Northland bus service, as an example.
The other parties are saying passenger rail service up to Timmins or Cochrane, and your party is saying to North Bay, and then we'll look at going further north. Is that...
Yeah, very open to the conversation about going beyond North Bay, but that's, I think, the way that we've made the commitment is responsible. And again, unlike in particular the NDP, our platform, our commitment is actually fully funded.
Mr. Del Duca, you said that Doug Ford isn't coming out. Is that confirmed?
Well, I was supposed to be number 2 on the list, and I believe that he's left the building.
Your thoughts?
I think it's arrogant. I think it's disrespectful. I think the easiest thing in the world for leaders to do is to stand at a podium and to read the words someone else has written for them, whether it's off a screen or off a script. What's hard about leadership, especially the leadership you need from a premier, is showing up, rolling up your sleeves, doing the hard work, having the capacity to do the job or grow into the job. And we've now seen for 4 straight years, Doug Ford doesn't have that capacity. And I think his performance today and his decision to leave before speaking with all of you really helps to emphasize that he just is the wrong person for this job, in particular at this time.
Even the NDP and the PC leader have both kind of used your record as a cabinet minister against you quite a few times in this debate. And I know you're saying it's new you, but some of the points they made up about kind of healthcare changes that could have been made before the pandemic or transit, a lot of voters could see that as legitimate. So I guess, why should voters trust that it is a new you and a new party?
Well, again, I think elections are about the future, not about the past. I think people here in Northern Ontario and elsewhere want to know which leader, which team, which plan is actually going to make life better for them in 6 months, in 12 months. They're not going to want to relitigate decisions from 10 years ago or 15 years ago, times from before I even became an MPP. I think they want to know who's going to fix seniors' care, who's going to make sure that we have enough doctors and nurses in Northern Ontario, who's got a real plan, a funded plan to confront the climate crisis. And I will just say, though I can tell you for sure Doug Ford does not have the capacity to lead this province, and he's made that evident because he delivered a budget that has no plan. By the way, a budget, even though I know he brags about it, that his own finance minister would not confirm on budget day that if elected or re-elected they would reintroduce and pass, right? So they're just kind of making it up as they go along. And I said this just a moment ago, I'll repeat it now. The NDP, lots of commitments, no numbers. No numbers, no costing, no details. We now have a provincial budget. We have an FAO report, Financial Accountability Officer's report. We have an Auditor General's report on the state of the province's finances. And 15 days after Andrea Horwath and the Ontario NDP released their platform, none of you here today know exactly what it's going to cost or how they're going to pay for it. After 4 years of cuts and chaos from Doug Ford, Ontario, Northern Ontario, can't afford more risk. Our plan is costed, balanced, forward-looking, and fair, and we will deliver on it.
Stephen, why do you think Doug Ford took off as quickly as he could or largely hasn't spoken or addressed media's questions in a couple of days?
Well, it's awfully hard to answer questions on the fly when you can't read a script someone else has written for you. And that's what he's been doing for 4 years. It's literally what he was doing today. It's what he's been doing for 4 years. Demonstrating no capacity, no curiosity, no determination to grow into the job, despite curveballs that get thrown at leaders from time to time. I want better for my province. I want better for my daughters and my aging parents. I want to know that a leader and a team actually has the capacity to do the job, to stand up for what they believe in, to deliver on it, and to grow into the job. And so I'm sure that the best advice he's gotten from his pollsters and his political consultants is to play that peekaboo game, run and hide, just coast all the way to June 2nd. That's not my style. That's why I'm out here taking the tough questions gladly. That's why when I launched our platform yesterday, by the way, a forward-looking and fully costed platform, I took questions for more than 1 hour from every single journalist who had a question, both in person and online. That's not only how I'm campaigning, it's how I intend to lead this province, openly, transparently, and facing the music as leaders should, but Doug Ford is clearly afraid to.
The major networks have a leaders meeting scheduled for the 16th. Will you be participating?
Yes, I will. I will for sure. And you should ask Doug Ford that question as well, if you can ever get to him.
Any more questions?
Thanks, everyone.
Hi, folks.
Andrea, why do you think Doug Ford took off so quickly?
You'll have to ask Doug Ford that. I have no idea. I'm glad to be here. Glad to spend an hour and a half talking about things that matter to Northerners, and that's what I was here to do. And I think we accomplished that.
Can you take a guess?
I'm sorry?
Can you take a guess as to why?
Oh, I really don't want to try to get into Doug Ford's head. Trust me.
But do you think he should be here taking reporter questions?
Well, of course. I mean, this is an election. It's a time for people to question their leaders, to understand what motivates them and what their priorities are. So any time to be able to connect with people should be taken by leaders, and you'll have to ask him why he doesn't see that as an important thing.
Do you think it has anything to do with the fact that your party has shared over the last couple of days that 2 of his candidates who were cabinet ministers received allowances from the alliances?
Oh, I have no idea. It could be that, but again, I would rather talk about what's important to Northerners, not what's important to Doug Ford, because this debate was supposed to be about the things that have been broken for so long here in Northern Ontario and how we can actually start fixing them.
Do you think it addressed the issues Northerners face? I mean, you've come to Northern Ontario numerous times, whether it's medical care, housing, mental health and addictions. Do you think this debate actually put Northern Ontario on a center stage? Because this is the first and only debate in Northern Ontario.
I certainly tried to keep bringing it back to Northerners and the experiences that I know that they've lived for far too long, and whether that's lack of access to equitable health care, whether that's a Northern travel grant that sometimes never shows up and often takes a very, very long time to show up, whether that's the lack of mental health and addictions resources, considering the opioid crisis rolling through the north. There's just so many pieces, whether that's the housing crisis, affordable housing crisis. I mean, there's so many things that Northerners prioritize that needed to be talked about. Some of them were things like the Northlander. That was something that was discussed, which was great. But there are lots of things that Northerners face each and every day. The highway maintenance is a big one that we've been talking about as well. And literally, people's lives are at risk when those highways are not properly maintained. The promises that keep coming from Liberal and Conservative governments, but never actually come to pass, that never actually materialize. These are the things that make Northerners, cynical that it's never going to change.
The same question I asked Stephen Del Duca about.
Sure.
I was surprised that the Ring of Fire, which is supposed to be such a big development in Northern Ontario to benefit all of Ontario, but specifically Northern Ontario, wasn't even discussed today or barely touched on. I found that surprising.
Well, it's interesting because the topics were something that FONOM put together, and we were respectful in terms of trying to talk about the things that they wanted to put on the agenda. But there's no doubt about it. The Ring of Fire has been an ongoing discussion for a very long time now, and there's no doubt that there's opportunity there. But one of the things I always talk about when I talk about the Ring of Fire is making sure that anything that gets done there is done with a prior informed consent with First Nations communities. We have treaty responsibilities. We must take those seriously. But also, it shouldn't be just a matter, and I've been saying this since I became leader, and probably before, not just a matter of pulling resources out of the ground and sending them somewhere else to be processed. People deserve good jobs here in Northern Ontario. I think one of the things COVID taught us is that we can be making those jobs, or we should be prioritizing those jobs staying in the north and putting the next generation and the generation of that next to that of workers to work, so that young people don't have to go south all the time to try to find opportunity.
When can we expect your plan to be costed? And
yeah, I'm glad you asked it. It's certainly on its way. We will be out with it very, very shortly. And I want to let people know we're taking the time necessary to do the hard work, to make sure that people can be confident in what we are putting forward as our costed platform. All of our big items, when we announced them, things like the dental care and mental health with your OHIP card and not your credit card, pieces like that we costed as we went. But we are taking the time to do it right.
Andrea, now the Liberals have their costed platform,
Sure.
with the Greens in a couple days, can you give us a timeline for when we're going to see your costing?
It'll be very shortly. I was hoping it could be done already, but there are some things that we want to take some time to look at. I can tell you we're not going to rely on federal funds. We're not going to make up dollars that don't exist in Ontario. But our plan is going to be really focused on making sure that middle income and low income families do not see any tax increases. People are having a hard time affording everyday life in this province, so there will be a tax freeze on middle and lower income families. But we also know there are some pretty big corporations that made windfall profits during the pandemic, and we're going to ask them to pay a little bit more so that we can make sure that healthcare has the investment it needs, mental health care, things like dental, things like pharmacare. Those are things that matter to people, and it will help them to afford life. Go to a dentist without having any benefits, and you're paying thousands potentially of dollars out of your pocket. Family of four, $1,200 a year. If your child needs braces, forget it. So these are things that will really help with folks and their cost of everyday life.
Andrea, the pandemic really exposed maybe all of Canada, but Ontario as well, in regards to healthcare and how insufficient it was, and how beds in ICUs were proportionally less in this country than other G7 countries. And Ontario is part of this country. What can you afford to provide Ontarians the care they deserve?
We can't afford not to. I think COVID showed us that. There was so much tragedy, so much loss. There was a healthcare workforce that wasn't provided with the PPE that they deserved or the infection prevention and control measures that should have been in place. A big part of the problem is that the hospitals were understaffed, as long-term care was understaffed. Those systems were falling apart with the previous Liberal government. And then Doug Ford came into office and made more cuts. We cannot continue to cut our healthcare system and expect it to be there for us. And I know it's a service that people want to see that's robust and available to them when they need it. So we will be making the investments in healthcare, and we'll be recruiting and retaining and returning healthcare professionals that Doug Ford has chased out of their profession with his low-wage policies like Bill 124 and his disrespect for the work that they do. We can have hospital beds, but we can't help patients to get well. We can't treat patients without frontline healthcare workers. And here in the North, we know that the crisis is even worse. I mentioned it during the debate, but hearing from those chiefs of staff from the northwestern hospitals about the crisis that they're in is terrifying. Having to close an emergency ward for a weekend, and the closest emergency ward, that was Red Lake a couple weeks ago, the closest emergency ward is a 2.5-hour drive from there. It's no longer an emergency when you're driving 2.5 hours. Northerners deserve better.
Andrea, you were agreeing a lot with a lot of the points today made by Mike Schreiner, kind of on mental health, regulating the rentals, and similarly, there's a lot of similarities with the Liberal platform. Like, are you finding it, is that difficult to kind of make your pitch to voters stand out? And I know I've asked you before about openness to governing with another party, if that's how the result shakes out. Could you kind of comment on that?
So not at all in terms of concerns about overlap, but what we know is that the Liberals had 15 years to get these things done, and they didn't. In fact, they brought us hallway medicine. They cut and squeezed hospitals to the point where we didn't have the level of care necessary to get us through COVID. Certainly, Mr. Schreiner brought up some points that were part of our platform. Some of them we announced quite some time ago, our housing plan, mental health, the mental health piece, and others. But it's really, this election is about who can defeat Doug Ford and begin to implement, begin to fix the things that we all want to see fixed. And with all due respect to Mr. Schreiner, that's not his team. Our party, the NDP, the official opposition, before the legislature was dissolved, we had 40 seats that we won in the last campaign. We were fewer than 10 seats away from defeating Doug Ford. And I think that there are lots of people that know that things need to be fixed. The best way to do that this time is to come together behind the party that has the capacity to do that, and that's the NDP.
What if it's not just one party, like we're talking about a potential minority situation? Would you be willing to combine teams or work together?
Sure. I just want to say this. I think it's really dangerous for people to play that poker game. We don't want to be in a situation where we end up with a Ford government again. And so I ask voters, think very carefully about how you cast your ballot this time around. We can't wait 4 years to see the end of Doug Ford. He's done a lot of damage already. When it comes to his buddies, they get anything they want. The rest of us are the ones that pay the price. We can't have another 4 years of that here in Ontario.
Who are his buddies that you've mentioned many, many times this afternoon? Who are we talking about?
Well, you just need to look at some of those big highways, that $10 billion of investment that Mr. Ford is committing to. Those two highways, the Bradford bypass and the 413, not only benefit developer buddies of Doug Ford's, but you can actually trace some of their donations straight to the Conservative Party and their campaign. That should never be the priority of a premier. The priority of a premier should always be making life better for the vast majority of Ontarians, not just folks that pad your campaign coffers. And those projects, those highways, also pave over farmland. They cut into the greenbelt. They cut into conservation areas. It's going completely backwards. Those huge highways to big mansions that nobody can afford is not going to help us with the affordability crisis here in Ontario. So his priorities are not the right priorities for this province right now. And when I say we pay the price, we pay the price. We pay the environmental price. The North will pay the price because there won't be enough capital dollars left in the transportation budgets to deal with your highways. And you've seen that notwithstanding that Doug Ford promised that last time around, he didn't deliver. The Northlanders still closed. Liberals closed it. He didn't bring it back. Highway 69 still is not completed. We have twinning of highways. Well, we have Highway 11 and 17 that are still problematic. Highway maintenance. These are all just transportation pieces, and when you have a government that's going to put all their eggs in those two highways because that's what his buddies want, that's a problem.
Andrea, can I ask you how you're going to get mental health professionals to come up here to
Sure.
work in the rural communities?
Yeah.
Because there's a problem even with some of the smaller communities are forcing out people who are mentally ill into cities like North Bay where they can care for them, and we even can't here. So what are you going to do to bring mental health professionals into the rural communities in Northern Ontario?
It's a great question, and that's why our plan includes not only making sure that people can get mental health services with their OHIP card instead of their credit card, but we've got a plan to provide training. So we know there are lots of folks who already have providers of social services and healthcare services, folks like social workers, folks like nurses, family docs, who are able to provide those services if they get the training. So our plan includes the training of those folks, the folks that work in nurse practitioner-led clinics, for example, and community health centers, making sure that we get some of that training done immediately so people can get the access that they need. We also have plans to boost up the amount of training for psychologists and psychiatrists, for example, as well. But the other pieces, and I touched on it a little bit during the debate, we all know that in order to bring healthcare professionals, for example, to northern communities, even to smaller communities like you're talking about, or to get them to stay, we need communities to be able to have a quality of life that they want. That's as simple as that. And so when you have municipalities in the north that can't afford things like fixing the arena, and so having to cancel the hockey leagues for the little ones, how is a psychiatrist or psychologist or a mental health worker going to choose that community when the amenities aren't there? Whether it's a hockey, whether it's an arena, rather, whether it's a community center. I've been talking to one town that's really concerned about lack of funding for a theater because they see that theater as something that would really help with that kind of quality of life piece. So it's the training, absolutely. It's the investment in the actual professionals, but it's also partnering with northern municipalities, big and small, because I hear this as well with some of the smaller towns. Sometimes they feel that they're left to the sidelines, and some of the larger communities get all the attention. We can fix that, but you have to know that it exists before you can fix it. And I certainly have spent a lot of time with Northerners over the years. And as I said in my closing remarks, my commitment to Northerners and Northern Ontario will never waver. And I look forward to being the premier that can finally start fixing some of these things.
There's another debate happening next week. Can you confirm you'll be there?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Will we have the fully costed platform before that?
I certainly am planning to make that happen. Absolutely.
Unsupervised consumption services being expanded, where are you looking at and how many?
Well, I don't think there should be a cap at all. So first off, I'm not going to put a number out because I don't think there needs to be a cap at all. In terms of where, I think the important thing to do is to partner with municipalities to make sure that if they identify this as a service that will help save lives and that will stop the horrifying overdose situation from happening, then I'll be that partner. To suggest that somehow these services are not useful or not needed is completely wrong-headed. You can't help people to get through an addiction and maybe start building a life if you haven't if you if they overdose, if you haven't prevented them from overdosing in the first place. So I've talked to a number of communities about this, and we have to provide those services, as well as, and I've, police chiefs around the country and around the province have talked about this, decriminalizing small amounts of personal use drugs. There's a whole discussion happening about the poison drug supply. These are things we need to take seriously. When you hear that in Sudbury in 2020 there were 51 crosses, I don't know if people have seen the memorial to people who have lost their lives to a drug overdose, but there were 51 crosses on that strip representing people who had passed away from an overdose. Now, 2 years later, there are 238 crosses. 4 people lost their lives to an overdose last week alone. It's a crisis. It's got to stop. It's heartbreaking. Families need hope that we can actually help to save their loved ones.
I have one more. I've often wondered, through the pandemic and when different issues arise, how much are you borrowing from the BC NDP party?
Well, it's interesting. We certainly, during the pandemic, watch what happens around not only our province, around our country, also around the world. And when we see other provinces stepping up to the plate to try to save people in long-term care, we wonder why our government refused to do that. And worse, they made a promise that they had no intention of keeping. They promised an iron ring around long-term care. It didn't happen. When we see the results of the commission that took a look at the government's response to Wave 1, it was clear that those solutions were being brought to Doug Ford and his team. And in fact, there's a part of that report that talks about how people finally gave up. The healthcare leaders in Ontario finally gave up bringing solutions to Doug Ford because he didn't want to spend the money, and he rejected every one of them. These are people's lives we're talking about. And now what is he doing? He's actually giving more contracts and more beds to those private providers of long-term care, the very ones that really failed our seniors. We would never do. We need to get the profits out of long-term care and the care back in. And that's one of the commitments that we've made to Ontarians, as well as build a home care system that people can rely on, because we know people prefer to have services at home for as long as possible, and it's better for them. They have better health outcomes, but we have to make sure that those services are reliable and adequate, and that has never been the case in Ontario.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to answer questions, but I just wanted to quickly say that acknowledge it's a pretty historic moment. The first time we've had 4 party leaders on the debate stage, and I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that history was made today.
Mike, what do you think about Doug Ford doing the dip?
I don't understand why the Premier's afraid to answer questions and be held accountable and transparent. I've always said I put people before politics, and I challenge the Premier to do the same by answering the questions that people in this province have.
You had a pretty good vantage point from right here. Did you see him get out of here?
He was gone before I even had a chance to see his fast getaway.
Why do you think he got out of here so quickly?
It just appears that the Conservative campaign strategy is to avoid being held accountable. I mean, he's avoided that throughout much of his time at Queen's Park, and it continues through the campaign. I think the people of Ontario deserve better. They deserve a Premier who's going to stand here and answer the tough questions. That's exactly what Ontario Greens will do.
There's another debate happening next week. Can you confirm you'll be there, even if
Yes.
Doug Ford is not there? You will be there?
I will be at the debate next week, regardless of whether the Premier is there or not. I also just want to say here in North Bay, North Bay Pride has asked all the leaders to be a part of the debate they're hosting later this month, and I believe I'm the only party leader who has confirmed that I will attend, if the others will attend as well. And so I'm happy to engage in the kind of conversations we've had today, whenever and wherever people want to host them.
Mike, a lot of the other leaders, especially Andrea and Duca, or Stephen, were kind of almost taking a lot of your responses as a jumping off point, or kind of, I agree with Mike, and you want to make their point. I mean, as we're supposed to be with both of them, what do you make of that dynamic?
Well, I believe the Ontario Greens have been leading on the policy issues that really matter to people. We put out our housing affordability strategy a year ago. One media outlet called it a masterclass plan in delivering the solutions Ontarians need. I believe the NDP's updated their housing plan 3 times now to catch up with us. Mr. Del Duca has said, yeah, the Greens have the best housing plan in his convention speech last fall. And I think you're seeing that right now. And I really want to highlight this issue right now because this is such an important conversation. We have to end legislative poverty in this province. We're leading on housing, we're leading on climate, we're leading on a number of issues, and we're now leading on addressing poverty in this province. So people with disabilities will not be forced into legislative poverty, and I challenge all the leaders to match us.
Mike, I got to ask questions. I asked the other 2 leaders the same question. Ring of Fire was not discussed today. Does the Green Party have any interest in developing it to the extent that, say, maybe not the extent the Conservatives want to develop it, but do you see that going against the grain of what the Greens stand for?
You know, I actually announced our Northern platform this morning and talked specifically about the Ring of Fire. And in my comments, I did talk about mineral to mining, manufacturing, supply chain for electric vehicles, battery storage in the province. Ontario Greens support developing the critical and rare earth minerals we have in Northern Ontario to generate prosperity for Northerners. I will say it needs to be done in partnership with Indigenous communities with free, informed, and prior consent, revenue sharing with both Indigenous communities and municipalities, and we need to ensure that we have best sustainable mining practices like those that David Robinson, our candidate in Sudbury, has been a global leader in championing. I believe Ontario can show the way in being a global leader in sustainable mining practices, Indigenous relations in developing those mines, and mining the critical minerals we need for the new climate economy.
Mike, you were the only leader today, I believe, that brought up climate change in one of your
Yes.
answers. What do you make of just the role that issue's played so far in the campaign, and thoughts on kind of what its relevance should be as we're going forward?
Well, I would say in more than one of my answers, I think my opening and closing and a number of answers, I brought up the climate crisis and what we're facing. I just want to say to the people of Ontario, and I said this in the debate, last summer, 793,000 hectares of northwestern Ontario was on fire. That's the size of the Greater Toronto Area, to put that into context for folks. The worst fire season in Ontario's history. The climate crisis is here. And if we don't address it, and it is now or never to address it, we will pay the price, our children will pay the price. And the reason I'm talking about the new climate economy is I want people to know that we can crush climate pollution and we can create new career and better job opportunities for people in the climate economy. Ontario is perfectly positioned to do that, and Northern Ontario has the critical minerals to help us to deliver on that.
Mike, what do you think about what the NDP has uncovered about a couple Conservative candidates / cabinet ministers that they were receiving allowances from their riding associations? Great to know your thoughts, and if you think that's something that should be allowed itself.
You know, those are internal party matters, and you know what? I'm here to talk about the issues that Ontarians really care about. I believe, you know, Conservatives can hold themselves accountable on those issues. I'll just say I never got into politics to make a lot of money. I got into politics because I want to address the climate crisis. I want to eliminate poverty in this province. I want to make sure my children and their generation have an affordable place to call home. Those are the issues that matter in this campaign, and that's where the Greens are leading, because we know that's the Ontario people want to build, and we're providing the leadership to do that.
Do you like what you've seen in any of the other parties' platforms when it comes to the climate issue, and are you see potential there to work with them in a minority situation?
Well, I mean, first of all, the Conservatives put out, I believe, a 2.5 page so-called climate plan on the environmental registry a couple months ago. I mean, that's an insult to us, our children, their future. The Ontario Greens have the most ambitious climate plan. I would really encourage the other 3 parties to meet this moment. It is now or never to address the climate crisis. We can do it in a way that addresses the cost of living crisis we're facing and can build a prosperous economy in Ontario, but you have to have the ambition to do it. The other parties have failed to deliver on that ambition. I'm ready and willing to collaborate with any party in this legislature to deliver the plan that Ontarians need to address the crisis and make sure that we're the global leader in the new climate economy.
But how do you make the more affordable for people to be green, to
great.
afford
I
electric
appreciate
cars
that.
and stuff like that. Like somebody was talking about the fact that it cost me $100 to fill my gas tank, and it does, but I can't go out and buy a new Tesla or an electric vehicle. How are you going to change things so that it's more affordable for the everyday person?
I really appreciate that question because that is the key question. I'll give you one quick example. My electric vehicle right now, list price is $38,000. With the Ontario Greens $10,000 rebate, combined with the federal government's $5,000 rebate, that's a $23,000 car. For a number of people, that now, who, if you can afford to own a vehicle, that's in the list of affordability, especially when it costs you anywhere from $5 to $15 to fill it up, depending on where you charge, versus somebody paying over $100. I was in Sudbury back in February, and I was charging at a Petro-Canada station, and a gentleman walked up to me, and he said, can you drive that in the north in the winter? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I'm driving all over the place in it. He's like, how much is it costing you to fill it up? I'm like, $15. And he's like, I just spent over $100. How do I get one of those? And I said, that's exactly what the Ontario Greens are talking about. We also recognize not everyone can afford a new vehicle, so we're offering a $1,000 rebate on used electric vehicles. There is a growing used electric vehicle market, and a $1,000 rebate for e-bikes. And I realize for a lot of people in rural and remote areas, that's not an option, but for people who live in communities in urban areas, that's a very low cost form of clean transportation. So that's exactly what we're doing, trying to figure out how do we make low-cost transportation options like electric vehicles affordable for the average person. I'm also going to add one other one, is home utility bills is a huge expense for Ontarians. We have an aggressive green building program that will help people retrofit their homes to save money by saving energy. One economic study shows that a $5 billion investment from the province will leverage $80 billion in private capital investment, create over 800,000 jobs, and reduce Ontarians' utility bills by $5 billion a year. Those are the kinds of solutions when I say we can address the climate crisis and the cost of living crisis that I'm talking about.
One good news thing is that the consensus was that you weren't responsible for the Northlander leaving.
Yeah, that was a good moment of consensus.
I wonder if you also see that as a greener solution.
Absolutely. Yeah, we are absolutely committed to bringing back the Ontario Northlander, providing the $200+ million in capital investment that will be required to bring it back, and the $12 million operating subsidy year over year to make sure people can access it in an affordable way. The other thing I think is really important that I talked about and none of the others talked about is the importance of having affordable Ontario Northland bus connections, connecting communities across the north. We know that we can't build rail, or it's going to take a while to build rail infrastructure all across the north, but we know that we can quickly ramp up bus service, and that is vital for a number of Ontarians to, access workplaces, medical appointments, go to school, visit family and friends. Those are huge parts of, one, creating an affordable transportation option for people, and one that significantly reduces climate pollution.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, everyone. Yep. Yours. Appreciate it.